Thank you, Upasana, and great to be here. I am a big fan of Thai, and that's why whenever Upasana and Gitika call me, I never say no, because I think the power of community building is powerful, and Thai has been leading the charts on that for many, many years, I would say. So I think first and foremost, we all need to do more of this, show up and be part of communities, because we probably underestimate the power of this a lot. Let me give you a little understanding of my career journey, and I'd like to do, Upasana, how much time do I have? About 20 minutes? Okay. So let me try and break it up into two parts. One is to talk about what we're all here for, because it is the She Summit, and I'm really happy to see the other gender represented also in some form, because I think we need allies that go beyond women. And the second part is about specifically talking about public policy as something that I'm very, very passionate about, and with most of you being either startup CXOs or founders yourself, why it's important to leverage it. So first, I think diversity and She Summit, the fact that today there is a She Summit, there is a concept of supporting her entrepreneurship. I think many of us as women always wonder, do we need quotas? Do we need spaces where we are being called out for being a woman founder, woman leader, woman entrepreneur? And that's often a debate that I've also had, that, if someone calls me and says, oh, this is a She Summit, should I go? Because I don't want to be seen as a leader because I'm a woman. And that debate. So I think in my head, and of course we know diversity debates and DEI debates in the US have taken a very different turn right now. So given what is happening around the world, I think everybody has their own version, their own take on diversity, and I would almost say feminism. So just to give you a background, I went to a co-educational school, modern school, Barakhamba. For those who are in Delhi, you would know that it is as co-ed as it can get in terms of, yes, you're a modernite and you wear it as a badge of honor that you've been to a school there. There is absolutely no distinction between being a girl or a boy. And then I went straight into what I would call the mecca of feminism with Lady Shri Ram College as my college, where, you've been to a co-ed all your life, and then suddenly you're in an all-girls college where, oh my God, if a guy comes to campus for some inter-college fest, you're like, oh my God, so it's like, what is this culture? I'm not used to this. I've always been in a co-ed school. So, and then I think in my career also, I've seen that diversity, where I've been in as a journalist in where there've been, like, I would say, female-dominated newsrooms. So for some reason, at least in television, we just had a lot of women. So, it would be hard to find men, because you'd be like, you need a news show where there is a male anchor and a female anchor, and we'd only have female anchors. So, it was a completely women-dominated newsroom, to then completely male-dominated boardrooms, where you're the only woman in a boardroom with 20 men. So I think where I come from, I've had the fortune of being in all kinds of this is also diversity, right? And I've had the fortune of being in very diverse environments where it is all male, all female, female-dominated, male-dominated, all kinds. And I think it's very hard to say, oh, are women discriminated against? Are women favored? Are women, what is your take on Me Too? And I think I've tried to develop my own take on diversity, and I think everybody should have their own take. And my take is as follows. I think I don't support quotas, but I definitely support communities. And I think there's a distinction. All of us meeting together as women, finding those safe spaces of interaction, finding platforms where we are lifting each other is important, because the more you see of us, the more we have conversations in rooms that are, feel safe and comfortable and resonate with each other, the easier it gets to resolve issues in your head or to think through it. Quotas are debatable, right? Do we need to have reservation for women in parliament? Do we need to have reservation for women in board positions? Do we need to say, oh, you know what, this is looking like a manel, can we get a woman? Because I think the minute we start getting into diversity quotas, we cross a line where very often meritocracy takes a back seat. And at least I would say, whenever I get a call from any event organizer to say, we'd love to have you on the panel, and I say, oh, I can't come, but I recommend someone else who's possibly a male colleague, friend, whatever, and they say, no, but we want a woman, I blacklist them, because I'm like, you know what, you didn't call me because you wanted me on this panel. You called me because you were filling your diversity quota and you didn't want a manel. And I always say, I'd rather have a manel than have a woman there just because we want diversity to show. Because that very moment you have undermined the fact that that panelists deserve to be on the panel. Similarly, when a headhunter calls and says, oh, there is a diversity hire, and that's why we're looking at you, I'm like, you're off my list in terms of a recruiter, and this company is off my list because you're looking for a diversity hire. You should never look for a diversity hire. You should look for the best hire. And yes, if there are two candidates in the end, both equally deserving, and one is a man and a woman, you may give that preference because you do believe in diversity, but you cannot say you're going looking for a woman in that position, because that itself is discriminatory in some ways, right? So I think we all have our versions of diversity, and I think the only thing I would say is that what women need, what do we as women need? I think we need more men who are out there making it a safe space, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. And what do I mean by that? We often over-index on posh, and we over-index on sexual harassment, and we over-index on stuff like that, which is real. And of course, we have to speak up on that. But I think the stuff that doesn't get spoken about is how many men will turn around and say, hey, I need to take a break this afternoon for an hour because I have to go and pick my kid from the bus stop and make sure that my child is settled at home. Or today, my nanny has not come, and my wife has gone to work, so I'm taking the day off. The more men we have who are okay to have these conversations, or a man tearing up, and being okay with it, a leader, so to say. I've worked with leaders where the CEO or the managing partner of a firm is stirred up in a town hall. And you know what? It wins a million hearts because you're human. It's not about only women who tear up, right? Because it's very easy to have stereotypes of being, oh, biologically women will cry. You know what? I'd love to see men cry at the workplace. It's beautiful because it makes everybody human. And similarly, I've had leaders who've said, you know what? If you shed a tear, you're not a good enough leader. And you know what? I shed a tear when I watch a movie. So what? If I shed a tear, if I'm at the workplace and I've had a conflict, I'm human, right? So I think humanizing ourselves and men doing more of that is what makes women feel safe at the workplace. And I think we need to encourage more of those allies. So enough about diversity and I think where we're at, but having conversations that allow us to be ourselves and authentic selves is, I think, the most important takeaway that I have on, at least personal takeaway on diversity. And similarly, when you have women who play the gender card or use gender to, to do all kinds of things, I think you push back diversity goals by hundreds of years because you've just played the woman card, and that's awful because many of us are trying to be meritorious and stand on our own feet. Now, just talking about my journey in public policy, just to give you a background, I became a journalist by accident because I had set out to, touch wood, I was a good student in school, and I think we still belonged to the middle class notion that all good students must take science because then you should try to become a doctor. So even though I came from a very liberal background, but there was still that baggage of, okay, I remember I wanted to opt for humanities or commerce in grade 11th. And my principal said, oh, if 95%ers like you start taking humanities and commerce, then who will take science? And he didn't allow me to switch streams, and I had to go through science in 11th and 12th, which I hated. And then I'm like, okay, since I have science, may as well apply for medical schools. And you know what? I failed miserably in all my medical exams, so I could not become a doctor. Thank God for that. Sorry if there are any doctors in the room, but I'm grateful I did not. And Lady Shri Ram College was starting out a program in journalism, which was a BA honors in journalism, a bachelor's in journalism. And, I think I was a bit of a rebel to the point that I said I want to do something different. I don't want to do the run-of-the-mill English honors sociology. Journalism sounds different. And that was the only reason I took up that program. I didn't know I wanted to become a journalist. But I think whatever happened by default, I'm really, really happy. It wasn't by design. And, 3 years of journalism at LSR, I was very fortunate because we got real-life exposure. So many of you may not know this, but there was Chief Election Commissioner T.N. Seshan, who was a powerhouse, at that time in India, to have a Chief Election Commissioner who decided the future of this country as someone who ran the Election Commission. He used to come to our college to give guest lectures. So I'm someone who's always believed in the power of learning from people who've been on the field. And then we had, Kumkum Chadha, a very well-known journalist who used to come and take our guest lectures. Sabina Sehgal-Saikia, who unfortunately lost her life in the 26/11 Mumbai attacks. She used to come and take our guest lectures. So I think the kind of, I would say, experience and a learning we got at LSR in terms of understanding that professions like journalism, you cannot teach in classrooms. You have to understand from real life experiences. And the value of that was immense. I started out with the Indian Express, spent about 7 years of my career in print media, and then made a switch to television when I joined NDTV and spent 11 years there as the Group Economic Affairs editor. So my lifetime was spent in corridors of power, and that meant standing for hours in Shastri Bhavan and Udyog Bhavan and Nirman Bhavan, waiting to meet a bureaucrat because you wanted to get a story about what's going on in this country, and understanding policy making. And I always had two sides to my role in television. One was to be an anchor or to have my own shows, or to be a field reporter. And I would give an arm and a leg to be a field reporter over being an anchor, because while that got you way more visibility, you'd be on air for 30 minutes if you even had a 30-minute show to anchor, or if you had your own show and an interview, you would get that kind of visibility. But it was about sitting in an air-conditioned studio and doing that versus, rolling up your sleeves, being on the field, spending a full day to meet a bureaucrat, and you may or may not land a story. But I think the power of relationship building, the power of being out there in the field, the power of meeting people and getting that one story which will give you a 10-second piece to camera where you come on air for 10 seconds. But that high of breaking a story that you have got with a lot of hard work and grit and spending precious time was way more than sitting in a studio and anchoring, because that is what I would call, armchair journalism. Or lazy journalism, or and the one good thing, at least at NTV, used to be that Prannoy Roy, who's considered the godfather of journalism, always taught us that for anybody to be a news anchor, you first have to be a reporter. And so we were in the era of television where there was no concept of just a news anchor. It's not that you're not news readers. The difference between a news reader and a news anchor: news reader reads the news, but a news anchor is someone who's been on the field, who's got their hands dirty, who understands news. And then the passion you bring even into anchoring is a lot different, because you have understood, what the reporter on the field is probably feeling or going through, and you understand news. News is in your blood then. So I think, having got trained in that school of journalism, I absolutely loved just being in corridors of power and spending my time there as a journalist, because that was precious. When you build relationships, those relationships, A, last a lifetime, B, you understand how bureaucrats think, you understand how hard policy making is. You're in their shoes and you're like, oh my God, you're trying to balance diverse interests. Oh, somebody wants this and somebody wants one, consumers feel. So look at quick commerce today, right? How many of you use Blinkit, Zepto, or any quick commerce platform? I think everybody. And 2 years ago, they didn't exist. So what I'm trying to say is that now today, imagine for a bureaucrat to come up to speed with a trend like quick commerce and say, oh, should we regulate it? Should we not? Oh, what is happening? Is it good? So there is the Kirana store who's making noise and saying, my livelihood's getting impacted, or is it getting better because your sales are increasing, or no, but, so there are just so many constituents. And this brings me to the whole field of public policy. And I'll just come back to what I do now and why I'm doing it is because after journalism and spending 18 years in journalism, I wanted a mid-career shift. So I said, what do I want to do? And I said, I want to continue working with government, because I think I like that part of the journey. And since I'd spent so much time in engaging with ministers and bureaucrats, I took up the profession of public policy. And I joined as the public policy head for Uber in India and South Asia, when Uber was still not a thing. People did not know what Uber was. Ministers we would have to go to minister offices and show the app and say, this is an app that connects riders and drivers. And they're like, what do you mean connects riders and drivers? And we'd say, well, at the click of a button, a car will arrive. And they're like, okay, but who is receiving the phone call? And we would tell the minister, no, nobody is receiving a phone call. That's the power of technology. He's like, no, I don't understand. There's a call center, right? There's a call center where this booking is going and someone's picking up this booking, and then somebody is telling a driver to go. We're like, no. This is technology. This is how a driver is also digitally literate to pick the ride. And it used to take so long to explain the tech model to bureaucrats who would say, yeah, I've heard of Uber because my son in the US uses Uber. That's the only conversation we would get every time. So I'm talking about those days when, forget getting ride-sharing regulations, you still had to convince bureaucrats and ministers about what that app was about. And then, of course, we had to do hardcore stuff, from price caps, fighting price caps, to fighting quotas, to fighting taxi unions. And there's always in technology the debate between incumbents and new entrants, and how they are going to react to new technology and the evolution of technology, and how technology will always hurt some and help some, right? So look at quick commerce today. So I think that fascinated me, the fact that technology will always outpace, innovation will always outpace regulation, and innovation will always be ahead of regulation. But how do regulators catch up, and how do you help them catch up? Because it's our job to educate the policymakers. It's our job to teach them what this new technology is, how transformational it's going to be, how it's going to impact masses. What are the unintended consequences of adopting this technology? What are the unintended consequences of a bad regulation if the government decides to curb the use of this technology? So I think understanding that, and in India, public policy meant liaisoning, or almost, if I would say, fixing or wheeler dealer. That used to be the concept of lobbying. And then suddenly, when you had large multinationals and big tech firms entering India, they brought with them the finesse of doing public policy in a structured way. And suddenly you had public policy professionals who wanted to enter this profession, because we wanted to say, oh, you know what, we're going to scientifically explain to government why this is good. So we would have data scientists sitting in San Francisco at the Uber office telling us the economic logic for why surge pricing works, because it's good for consumers, because you know what, there is a demand-supply equation there, and when you allow one consumer who has the higher purchasing power to go ahead and book that ride, you automatically solve for the demand-supply situation, and the pressure eases up, and those who cannot pay also start getting the cars. But if you do not allow market economics to work at that time and surge pricing to kick in, you're actually hurting all consumers. So making those logical arguments in front of government to say why it's a bad thing to have to cap pricing, and why surge pricing is actually good for the consumer. So those kind of logical arguments, I think, presenting before policymakers to help them make informed decisions around policies is what public policy does. And I think that was fascinating, because at least working at Uber, which comes under transport, which is a state subject, which meant that you're working with 30 state governments, helping them understand, because transport, you're working with RTOs, you're dealing with problems of drivers, you're dealing with problems of convincing governments why they should allow, Uber to operate in India. I think coming from that time to then moving to Salesforce, which was a completely the opposite end of the spectrum, which was a very well established. It was not a B2C company, it was a B2B company, and there the challenges were different, because you had to tell people, oh, what is cloud? And you had to explain to government officials what cloud is, and cloud is not cloud, but cloud is like, it is what it is. It's still hard to explain what cloud is, right? So you had to explain and build the relevance of a brand like Salesforce with government. And you know what? Most people understand B2C so well. It's like household name. Microsoft's a household name, but Salesforce is not, right? So how do you create excitement about Salesforce with government officials and help them feel like, oh, this is a company we need to engage with, and how Salesforce is impacting India, and how you can use it in the railways, and how you can use Salesforce in so many other ways, and how it's impacting. So I think that was a different level of challenge. And also in terms of policy issues, we looked at things like data privacy, data localization, cross-border data flows. Why is the government insisting on having data centers in India? Helping Salesforce understand why this is a concern for governments, why data sovereignty is a thing. And yes, it is a thing, because everybody is using, the whole data is the new oil, a logical argument, and how you need to keep data in closed borders, but what are the unintended consequences of doing that? So I think conversations like these is something that we would have in closed doors with the government. But I think most important, part of understanding public policy is when do you play on the front foot, when do you play on the back foot, when are you having closed door conversations, when are you making noise around an issue, because there are times when the government wants you to make noise, because you know what, they have to build public opinion. And if they want a policy change done, one policy change will always benefit some and hurt some. So it is in the government's interest also to work with you, because you have to be part of that noise at times. And coming to Startup Policy Forum, after Salesforce, I joined Sequoia Capital, which is India's largest venture capital firm, now called Peak 15 Partners. And at Peak 15 Partners, Sequoia Capital, I got the opportunity to work with startup founders. And that, I think, was the most precious experience I've had in my career, because it's one thing to work with what were at one time startups. So Uber, no longer a startup. Salesforce, no longer a startup. But you know, today these are real companies that are 4 years into their journey, 5 years into their journey, 10 years into their journey at best. But these are founders building ground up, like many of you today, right? They're sitting in Bangalore, sitting in Mumbai, sitting in Delhi, and building their businesses ground up, and to get them excited about public policy, to help them understand why it's important for them to think policy in the early stages of their journey, and why policy has to be built in. It may be different for every business, but it's important for you to communicate your value to your stakeholders, and government is a stakeholder, right? Media is a stakeholder, because at the end of the day, if you're not talking to these two stakeholders, you're missing out on an important piece of your company building. And you know, it's interesting, because founders would tell me, many of them techies, and they would say, we know how to build, you know, we're a CTO and co-founder. We don't even know how to enter a government office, and why would we do that? I'm not interested. And then to help them understand that this is, if you're a leader and a CEO, this is part of your journey. You have to be able to also communicate your value. If you're communicating your value proposition to your customer, the customer is a stakeholder. If you're communicating your value proposition to an employee is a stakeholder. Similarly, government is a stakeholder. Media is a stakeholder. You've got to learn to work with these constituents, and they are tougher stakeholders than your customers and your employees, because your customers and employees have already bought into your proposition. But those are the more external stakeholders to you. But you need to communicate with them, and you need to learn to engage with them. You need to learn to manage them. And I think that gave me the idea that there is no platform today that helps startups on policy. And while you know, there are different platforms that do different kind of work, TIE does amazing work on community building. I think it is one of the best platforms that helps communities. We have many industry bodies that cater to different constituents, but there is no industry forum, body, alliance that helps startups on policy. And that's where we're at. I founded Startup Policy Forum 3 months ago. Today we have close to 60 members representing about $100 billion in valuation that are working with us on policy issues. Most recently, we were at METI talking data privacy, and it was fascinating to see so many startup CXOs come and voice their concerns on data privacy. And if I just look back a few years ago when I was at Salesforce, and I used to be in several of these meetings talking data privacy, there would not be one startup executive or one startup founder in the room. And the government used to say, what do startups think? And nobody knew, because you know what? Startups don't have policy teams. Startups cannot afford policy teams. And they don't have well built out policy functions, whereas a Meta and a Google and an Amazon would have those. So their voice is missing. And that's the space we want to fulfill, have their voice in the room, make sure that at scale we can solve for what startups want on policy, and help them navigate what I call corridors of power. So the idea really is connect the corridors of innovation with the corridors of power. I'll pause with that, but I'd love to take any questions if you have. Anything, I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes, please.
So are you also part of forums like India-AI, which are creating the AI policies or data privacy policies specifically for ethical AI?
100%. We're working with governments. We work with all departments. So India AI mission led by Mr. Abhishek Singh, we work with them actively. We just had something called Startup Better on National Startup Day, where Mr. Abhishek Singh came and spoke with all founders, talked about what the government's doing on AI. We are making submissions on ethical AI, AI governance, how India should view AI. So a large part of our job is to advise governments on policies that will, and help shape policies that will be in the interest of the startup ecosystem.
And just an extension to that question, how do you take their input and who do you take into consideration about giving the input about what kind of AI policy, what is the future, how the prediction is done?
Excellent question. So I think that's why we need people excited about policy, because firstly you need to understand that today you could be doing any business, but data privacy will impact you. Because you know, what is data privacy? Somebody is a data principal and somebody is a data fiduciary, right? So you are the data principal. Every individual, every citizen is a data principal. Your data is being used by anybody. Today, if you're selling flowers, right? I saw some flowers there. So you're selling flowers, right? And you will have a customer, right? You're going to collect the customer's data because you're going to deliver, right? So you are a data fiduciary. Are you a data, processor? What is your role? So you could be doing any business in this country, but data privacy law will impact you. And I think helping understand and helping create that awareness in the startup community that, you know what, there are laws that are governing you and you probably don't even know. And they could either help you or hurt you, but you've got to know. And if you don't know, you will know not. So it's very important that startups understand laws and regulations that govern them and take part in these conversations. So what we do as a forum is to answer your question, depending on what the topic is, that we could have a founder in the room, we could have a general counsel in the room, we could have a CFO in the room, we could have a policy head in the room. But we encourage our members that please come and be part of these conversations, because if you're not going to come, you can't shape the policy. Then don't cry wolf later and say, oh, you know what, this is such a terrible policy. Because you've not been part of shaping it when you had the opportunity to. So that's how we work.
So I have a question here.
Sure.
I might be a data principal myself, but to run my business, I also need data.
Correct.
Every visiting card that I collect today becomes data for me.
Correct.
Right? So am I infringing any laws? A software like a WhatsApp API works on a principle of the data that we provide to it, but I'm not legally sourcing it from anywhere.
Correct.
So then how does this figure in?
So there are very well laid out frameworks coming in the upcoming law. We are now at a stage where this law is in its final leg. The interesting thing is that India's data privacy law is what, say, Europe did many years ago, called the GDPR. Now, GDPR came very early on in when things were happening, and India has taken very long. So I'm telling you, there was something called the Puttaswamy judgment in 2007 that declared privacy as a fundamental right, that all of us have a right to privacy. It's then when the Indian government started drafting its data privacy law, because data is everywhere. Like every time you're doing you're opening a Gmail account, there is some data there, right? And there's a consent framework. We all sign consent without reading what the consent says, right? So there's a full consent manager framework that we talk about. Now, to answer your question, I'm not going to go into very specifics, because we can have a full session on data privacy, and that's why you should come join our forum and we'll invite you to these conversations. But to give a big picture answer to your question, the government is not bringing in this law to make it onerous or to make you liable or to make your life miserable. They're bringing this law to ensure that there are some guidelines and principles under which every citizen of this country operates and their data is protected, and yet businesses know what regulations are there, right? So today you're a data fiduciary as well as a data principal. When you're a customer to another business, you're a data principal to them, right? But when you are a business, you're the data fiduciary, right? So I think it's complicated, but all I can tell you in a big picture way is that this law is only meant to help and have some sort of guiding principles and regulations under which a country like ours needs to operate. Consent of children, what age, how do you consent, how do you take data of children. It's very, very complex, so we can have a separate session on data privacy. I'd love to, because I think everybody needs to know data privacy. But it's not meant to be heavy-handed. That's not the idea.
Thank you.
Sorry, yeah, hi, please tell me.
You started your career working on the field.
Sorry, I missed the initial bit. You said a lot of women?
I don't know a lot of women who like to work on the field,
okay.
like who like to go on the field and like.
Yeah.
So I was one of them as well when I was expanding my company. So great talk, Shweta. So what I have to ask is, like, when we are growing our company like ground up, we as business, we are so busy in like building the business, and we also want to have it all, right? We want to like live the life full-fledged, and we forget to like engage and network with people. And then when our business is settled, we are like, yeah, now we are ready, because we want to like have everything perfect before we go and expand it up. So what's the best way to go out and create connections other than these events that we are already doing? Because over here also it's like a preconceived notion that, you know, people who are at a senior level, we go and approach them. So it's like, are you playing any card, or what do you have to? So how do you see that we can break upon these barriers and the perceptions that usually on the other side is male dominated have?
Excellent question. I love the question around networking, because I think networking is now becoming not a very great word. Like, people don't take it very well. And I think there's a difference between people who network for work and people who network for network. Like, and I'll try to explain that. If you're a worker, and a worker means like 80% of the time you're working, you're building your business, right? But you're spending 20% of your time networking, because that feeds into your work, right? Because that's important for you, building those bridges. If you're going to sit in a office and build your business cannot build. And you have to be out there. It doesn't matter what business you're doing. And by this, I mean the founder. Of course, the founder is going to hire some people who have to be internal facing, some who have to be external facing. But I'm talking about the founder, right? A founder has to be external facing. I don't think there should be a single founder who thinks they can sit in a garage office or a fancy office and build their business. If you're not going out there and meeting people, you cannot be a founder. So I think networking has to be a part of any founder's journey. Now, I know people who are only networking and not working. That's not okay, because then you cannot say, what do you do for a living? I just go to events and I network. No. And is there value in forums like these, or in coming to places like these? 100% yes. I don't think I've been very fortunate in my career now, 27 years, that I've really been out there, because if you're a journalist or you're a public policy person, you just have to be out there meeting people. But I don't know of a single event, place that I have walked away with saying I did not gain something. Whether it is meeting an old friend, or it is building a new connection, learning something, or just being part of a community. I believe in one principle: no effort in life goes waste. It helps you in a way that you don't know. Some are tangible, some are intangible. It's very difficult to say, I went to She Summit and gained this. No, you cannot quantify it. But maybe you've built a connection you're going to use 10 years later, or maybe you've learned something that will help you and you've taken back something. So sometimes just being out there is helpful. And the power, I think all of us have been through COVID, and we know it. The power of in-person, the power of just in-person meeting somebody, the energy that comes. Energy does not lie. And that's what you miss when you're online versus in person. So I would say there's a lot of merit in being out there and in person. And there's, at least in professions like ours in public policy, I had a boss, Rachel Whetstone, who led public policy for Google for many years, and then at Uber, and then Netflix, and now she's with an AI firm in the Valley. And she used to say that I have just one principle for external facing roles, right? That check your calendar. And if you're spending any more than 25% of your time in office, you're not doing a good job. I don't want to see you in the office. So you know what? If I see you very often in office, there's something wrong, because you are supposed to be out there meeting people. And that's true for like external facing professions like ours. It may not hold true for everybody, but I think it holds true for founders, because founders have to be out there talking to people, meeting people, not all the time, but you cannot be so internal facing that you don't have awareness of what's happening in the world. All right, I think we're out of time, but thank you everyone. And would love to engage with any of you. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I am usually quite responsive on LinkedIn, but very happy to connect in any other way. You can just write to me at shweta@indiaspf.org. Would love to have some of you join the forum. We have a membership-based model, but I do have an exception for women founders, because I am building that community myself. And at least for a while, we're giving something called an experiential membership to early stage women founders. So would love to see some of you join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Shweta. Lots of learnings there. I'd like to invite Upasana to give Shweta a small token, please.